Amelia thought she had everything: a billion-dollar empire, glittering parties, and old friends who never stopped praising her. But when her company faced a deal that could ruin thousands of employees, nobody warned her that her own signature would destroy her. Only Liam, a poor single father working the night shift in her own building, dared to stop her and say the truth that hurt the most. The people she trusted most were using her as their shield. Furious, Amelia fired him on the spot. By morning, alone with the numbers, she discovered every single word he said was true. Stay until the very end to find out whether Amelia loses everything or finally finds the honest life she deserves. Sterling Hope Technologies, the medical technology company Amelia had spent nearly a decade building from a small research startup into a national name, was preparing to acquire MedNova Systems, a company that claimed to hold breakthrough artificial intelligence for diagnosing disease earlier than any human doctor ever could. The deal was worth more than $1 billion, and Jason, the chief financial officer and Amelia's closest friend since their college years together, described it in every meeting as the single move that would finally turn her into the most powerful and respected woman in the entire industry. On the night before the signing, champagne glasses rose again and again around a private rooftop overlooking downtown Chicago, string lights swaying gently in the summer wind, and Grace, the head of communications and Amelia's oldest friend from those same college years, praised her vision with a warmth so convincing it felt like sunlight on Amelia's skin. Ryan, a board member who had known Amelia socially since her early 20s, lifted his glass high and promised her face would soon appear on the cover of every major business magazine in the country, that history would remember her name the way it remembered the great founders of the last century. Amelia laughed freely that night and let herself believe, for one soft and unguarded evening, that the people who had known her the longest were also the people who loved her the most sincerely. She never noticed, not even once, that their eyes lingered on the projected stock price glowing on the screen behind her, not on her face, not on the exhaustion she had been hiding for months beneath careful makeup and rehearsed smiles. While the party glowed above the city like something out of a dream, Liam moved quietly through the empty floors far below, invisible in his gray uniform the way most maintenance workers eventually become invisible to executives who never bother to learn their names, who look through them the way one looks through glass. He had once worked as a financial controller before he lost his entire career for reporting fraud at a previous company, and though he rarely spoke of that chapter of his life, the sharp instincts from those years never fully left him, the way a soldier never fully forgets the sound of danger. While repairing a faulty electrical panel on the finance floor that night, he noticed shredders running long past midnight, their motors humming in an otherwise silent building, and disposal bins stacked high with documents bearing the names of companies that did not seem to exist anywhere in public records. He was not a curious man by nature, and he certainly was not the kind of man who searched for scandal out of boredom, but a forgotten printout left carelessly on a desk caught his attention anyway, because the revenue numbers listed for MedNova made absolutely no financial sense for a company its stated size. Liam recognized the pattern almost instantly, the quiet, elegant signature of money moving in a circle designed to look like organic growth to anyone who did not know how to read between the lines. Later that same night, standing in the shadows of the parking garage beneath the tower with a toolbox still in his hand, he watched Jason hand a small hard drive to Ryan and heard him say, almost casually, almost bored, that once Amelia signed the final papers, every legal consequence in the world would belong to her and to no one else. Standing there in the dark with grease still on his knuckles, Liam understood something that none of the people celebrating with champagne 20 floors above him had yet allowed themselves to see. Amelia was not the architect of this deal at all. She was its final, carefully chosen target. The next morning, before his shift ended, Liam returned quietly to the archived files he had glimpsed the night before and found that MedNova had signed contracts with 3 separate consulting firms, all 3 registered at the exact same nondescript address in a business park outside the city. Each of those firms traced back, quietly and indirectly, through layers of paperwork designed to discourage anyone from looking too closely, to Jason, to Ryan, and to an investment fund that Grace herself represented through her media contacts. Liam knew perfectly well that digging any deeper could cost him his job within the hour, so he copied only what was already publicly accessible and wrote down every irregularity he could confirm with total certainty. Nothing more, nothing speculative. On the morning of the signing ceremony, dressed still in his work uniform, He waited outside the boardroom doors, and when Amelia's assistant reached instinctively for security, he said only that Amelia would lose her entire company if she signed that contract today. Something steady and unshaken in his voice made Amelia pause in the doorway and give him 5 minutes she did not technically owe a maintenance worker at all. Liam explained, without exaggeration and without raising his voice, that Mednova had grossly inflated the number of hospitals actually using its technology, and had used Sterling Hope's own capital funneled through hidden channels to manufacture the illusion of legitimate revenue. Then he said something that struck far deeper than any spreadsheet ever could. The people she called her closest friends were protecting their own interests in this deal, not protecting her. And there was a difference between the two that could destroy her if she never learned to see it. Jason walked into the boardroom at that exact moment, and within seconds twisted the warning into an accusation of theft. His voice was dripping with practiced concern. Grace claimed Liam might have stolen confidential data from the servers, and Ryan brought up his dismissal from his previous employer as proof of instability, conveniently leaving out the fact that Liam had been fired specifically for reporting fraud, not for committing it himself. Humiliated in front of the entire board, her cheeks burning, Amelia ordered his immediate suspension and revoked his access to the building without asking a single follow-up question, without giving herself even one moment to think. Before he was escorted out, Liam did not beg, and he did not argue his case further. He simply told her quietly that by the following morning her own name would appear on documents that Jason himself would never dare to sign with his own hand. Amelia still approved the preliminary agreement that same afternoon, her signature steady on the page, but his words followed her home that night like a splinter buried too deep to remove with her fingers alone. Unable to sleep, restless in a way she could not explain to herself, she checked her digital signature history out of pure instinct and found her electronic signature attached to a lengthy document she had never once opened, never once read, never once even seen before that moment. The next day, Amelia called Jason into her office and asked, as calmly as she could manage with her heart pounding beneath her blazer, about the document bearing her signature. He answered without a flicker of hesitation, calling it nothing more than a routine administrative matter, then wrapped an arm around her shoulder the way he had done 1,000 times before, urging her gently to rest and stop worrying herself sick over paperwork that people like him were paid to handle. Grace arrived only minutes later carrying a bottle of expensive wine, trying to turn the tense, uneasy conversation into something worth celebrating instead. Amelia pretended to accept their explanation completely, smiling the way she had practiced smiling for cameras her entire adult life, but quietly, without telling either of them, she asked the technology department to pull the full login history connected to her executive account for the past month. What she found made her stomach turn over completely. Her account had been accessed directly from Jason's own workstation during the exact hour she had been photographed, smiling at a charity gala across the city, surrounded by cameras that could prove, beyond any doubt, that she had not been the one sitting at that keyboard. Eleanor, the general counsel and one of the very few people who had never joined Amelia's tight inner social circle, warned her privately, in a hushed voice behind closed doors, that the document in question transferred the entire responsibility for verifying Mednova's financial claims directly onto Amelia personally and no one else. If regulators ever investigated the acquisition, the board could argue convincingly that Amelia herself had approved falsified numbers with full knowledge of their falsity. Alarmed and shaking slightly, Amelia tried to reach Liam immediately, only to learn from a nervous junior employee that he had been escorted from the building the day before and had not even received his final paycheck yet. She drove to his apartment that evening herself without a driver, without an assistant trailing behind her, to a modest unit in an ordinary working-class neighborhood far removed from the glass towers she called home. The contrast between her world and his settled over her slowly like a quiet and uncomfortable accusation she could not quite shake off. His daughter was not there that night. She was staying with her grandmother while Liam worked nights to make ends meet, and the only sound drifting from that part of his life was a short phone call, reminding him gently to send the monthly support payment on time as promised. Liam was not eager to help Amelia so quickly or so easily, telling her plainly, without cruelty but without softness either, that he suspected she had only come to him because she was afraid of losing her power, not because she genuinely cared about uncovering the truth. Amelia asked him, her voice smaller than she intended, to tell her everything he knew without softening a single word for her comfort. Liam answered that the most painful truth of all was not hidden somewhere deep in the numbers. Jason, Grace, and Ryan had chosen her specifically, deliberately, because they understood with absolute certainty that she would never suspect the people she loved most in the world. He showed her the early evidence of the shell companies he had gathered, but was careful to warn her that this was only the surface layer of something far larger than either of them yet fully understood. Amelia admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, that she had ignored warning signs for years because she was terrified of becoming alone again, the way she had been after her parents died so suddenly, leaving her with money but nothing resembling family. Liam agreed to help her, but only under one condition, that she promised not to act rashly and stop trusting any claim that could not be proven with hard evidence. When Amelia returned to her own apartment much later that night, exhausted and unsettled, she found Grace already sitting comfortably inside on her sofa, even though Amelia had never once given her a key to that particular door. Grace explained, smiling brightly, that she had let herself in through the building manager to plan a surprise for Amelia's birthday still weeks away. But Amelia noticed almost immediately that her personal laptop had been moved several inches from exactly where she always left it. Rather than confronting her old friend directly, Amelia forced a smile onto her tired face and continued playing the role of the trusting friend she no longer truly was inside. Following Liam's careful advice, she announced publicly the very next morning that she intended to finalize the Mednova acquisition within 48 hours, and the announcement sent Jason and Ryan scrambling immediately to arrange an emergency meeting to transfer the deposit funds before anyone could change their mind. While the tower buzzed with a strange manufactured urgency, Liam and Eleanor worked quietly together from a small rented office space far from Sterling Hope's headquarters, tracing every payment they could access through public filings and old financial contacts Liam still trusted from his previous career. They discovered, piece by piece over several long nights, that company funds had been routed through Mednova and back again into private accounts controlled entirely by Jason's small circle, a pattern that had clearly been constructed over more than 2 full years of careful planning. Liam noticed something else too, something colder. Every time Grace had gently suggested a gala, a wellness retreat, or an out-of-town conference for Amelia, the timing aligned precisely with moments Jason had used Amelia's own account credentials while she was conveniently elsewhere. Sitting alone with that growing pile of evidence, Amelia began remembering dozens of small, forgotten moments from years of friendship. Jason always insisting on handling the paperwork himself so she wouldn't have to be bothered. Grace quietly selecting every single assistant who ever worked closest to her. Ryan repeatedly urging her with a friendly laugh not to bother reading the longer financial reports herself. She understood, with a pain that settled heavy and permanent in her chest, that their friendship had been built like a soft, comfortable, carefully constructed cage around her entire life. Jason grew suspicious the moment he learned Amelia had personally requested the original unedited Mednova files rather than the polished summaries his team always prepared for her. He quietly had someone follow Liam for several days and soon discovered the two of them had met more than once outside of company property. Rather than confronting her outright, which might expose too much too soon, Jason let Grace leak a carefully worded story suggesting that Liam was manipulating a vulnerable, grieving CEO for his own financial gain, and a photograph of Amelia leaving his modest apartment building found its way onto a gossip website within a matter of hours. The board began quietly, privately questioning her judgment in hushed phone calls she was not meant to overhear. Jason proposed, with practiced and convincing concern in his voice, that Amelia's executive authority be temporarily limited to protect the company's fragile stock price during this sensitive period. Amelia understood exactly what this truly meant underneath the polite language. They were accelerating their plan to remove her entirely from the company she had built with her own hands. That same difficult week, Eleanor uncovered a private filing proving that Jason had begun drafting a formal petition to remove Amelia from her position more than 6 months earlier, long before any of this crisis had even come to light publicly. Jason called an emergency board session without warning and announced, with theatrical sorrow etched carefully across his face, that Amelia had developed an inappropriate personal relationship with a former employee accused of stealing confidential company data. Grace played the role of the wounded, heartbroken friend beautifully, claiming through tears that she had tried for months to help Amelia before her judgment slipped beyond anyone's ability to save her. Ryan produced a folder of documents bearing what appeared to be Amelia's own signature, seeming to authorize a long series of unusual and unexplained payments over the past year. Amelia wanted desperately to fight back immediately, to stand up and expose them all right there in the room, but Liam urged patience through a hurried phone call, reminding her that they still lacked a direct, undeniable link connecting Jason to the final account receiving the stolen money. Reluctantly swallowing every instinct in her body, she said nothing in her own defense that afternoon, and the board voted almost unanimously to suspend her from her position immediately. In front of the cameras waiting eagerly outside the building, Grace embraced Amelia tightly as though comforting a grieving friend, then whispered, low enough that no microphone could ever catch it, that she should have known her place from the very beginning of all this. When Amelia finally returned home that night, exhausted beyond words, her corporate bank access, her company vehicle, and even her office building credentials had all been quietly and efficiently revoked, without a single phone call of explanation. The people who once called her every single day of the week disappeared within hours, as though they had never existed at all. Invitations vanished from her calendar one by one. Business partners stopped answering calls they used to pick up on the first ring. The same glittering social circle that had once toasted her success now mocked her openly across every outlet that would listen to their version of the story. In her despair, sitting alone on her own kitchen floor for the first time in years, Amelia blamed Liam bitterly for making her doubt everyone around her while still somehow failing to save the company she had poured her entire life into building. Liam did not offer her comforting lies. Even then, even seeing the tears streaming down her face, he told her plainly, gently but without flinching, that her pain was not truly about losing the title of chief executive officer at all. Her pain came from finally, painfully admitting that the people closest to her heart had never once loved the real woman underneath the company, underneath the money, underneath the polished public image. Furious and humiliated by how deeply his words landed, Amelia told him sharply to leave her apartment. Before walking out into the cold night air, he quietly left behind a thick folder on her counter, containing records of the many times he had tried years earlier to report fraud at his previous company before losing everything he had built. Reading through those papers alone late into the night, Amelia realized that Liam had once had a stable, respected career of his own, and that his current poverty was never a failure of ability or intelligence, but the direct price he had paid for refusing to compromise his integrity. She also discovered, buried in the same folder, that Jason had deliberately hired Liam's former consulting firm to work on the Mednova deal from the start. That single discovery proved beyond any doubt that Jason had known exactly who Liam was from the very beginning, and had tried quietly to remove him from the picture before he could ever become a threat to their carefully built scheme. Desperate now to apologize to make things right, Amelia rushed to find Liam again, only to discover his small apartment had been violently torn apart, drawers emptied onto the floor, cushions slashed open with a blade. Liam himself was gone, along with the hard drive containing the most critical copy of the evidence they had painstakingly gathered together over the past several weeks. Not long after she called the police in a panic, a message arrived on her phone from an unknown number. If she wanted Liam to remain safe, she needed to publicly accept full responsibility for everything by the following morning, no exceptions. Eleanor urged her strongly to contact the authorities immediately, pointing out something important that Amelia had missed in her panic, that the threatening message never demanded a ransom or specified any actual location, which was unusual and suspicious for a genuine kidnapping. Amelia slowly realized that Jason likely had not physically taken Liam captive at all. He may simply be using Liam's stolen phone to frighten her into silence and cooperation before the deadline passed. Instead of falsely confessing to a crime she had never actually committed, Amelia gathered every ounce of courage she had left and called an unscheduled press conference, announcing to a room full of stunned reporters that she would hand over the company's complete financial records to investigators without any condition whatsoever. The bold move stunned Jason completely, since he had been counting entirely on her staying quiet just long enough for the acquisition to close and the money to disappear for good. Standing tall before the cameras, Amelia admitted publicly and clearly that she had trusted her subordinates far too easily and had failed to properly scrutinize documents carrying her own name, but she firmly refused to claim responsibility for a fraud she had not personally committed. She promised, her voice steady now, to protect every single employee at Sterling Hope and ordered the entire Mednova acquisition frozen immediately, effective that very hour. While the cameras stayed fixed on her carefully worded statement, Eleanor worked quickly behind the scenes, tracing the last known signal from Liam's phone to an old, mostly abandoned storage facility once used by one of the consulting firms tied to the fraud. Amelia arrived there herself with local police only minutes later and found Liam locked inside a dusty records room, shaken but physically unharmed, after two of Jason's men had threatened him roughly and seized what they believed was the only hard drive containing the evidence. What none of them knew was that Liam had cleverly hidden the real memory card inside a small repair device he always carried in his pocket out of habit. The hard drive they had stolen from him contained only an incomplete, deliberately misleading copy. The recovered memory card proved conclusively that Jason had funneled tens of millions of dollars into a hidden account over the course of more than 2 years. Yet one serious obstacle still remained ahead of them. Jason's expensive lawyers could easily argue in court that this particular piece of evidence had been obtained illegally, and therefore could never be used against him. Liam remembered something crucial from his years working in financial control, something that made his heart begin to race with hope for the first time in days. The company's own servers automatically logged the true origin point every single time the chief executive's digital signature was used anywhere in the system, without exception. That original, unforgettable log lived deep inside the data center beneath company headquarters, and Jason, anticipating the coming forensic audit, was already quietly preparing to erase the entire system before anyone could examine it closely. Amelia decided without hesitation this time to return to the building despite having no valid access credentials left to her name at all. Liam warned her gently that this could easily be the final trap set for both of them together, but Amelia told him firmly, looking him directly in the eyes, that she would not let him face this particular truth alone, not this time, not ever again. The moment they finally reached the tower entrance late that night, the entire building unexpectedly lost power all at once, and somewhere far below them, the servers silently began an automatic wipe of everything they desperately needed to save. Drawing on years of practical hands-on maintenance experience that no executive in that building had ever bothered to learn, Liam managed to restart the emergency backup power supply, feeding the server floor with only seconds to spare. Amelia called Eleanor immediately and asked her to gather the entire board into the main conference room without delay, while opening a direct, secure line to the fraud investigators already assigned to the growing case. Believing mistakenly that Amelia had finally come to negotiate quietly, Jason offered smoothly to return a small portion of her shares if she would simply accept full responsibility once and for all, and let the matter end there quickly and quietly. Grace made one final, desperate emotional appeal in front of everyone, reminding Amelia tearfully of their many years of close friendship and accusing her bitterly of betraying real, genuine loyalty for the sake of a poor stranger she barely knew. Amelia answered calmly, without a trace of anger in her steady voice, that Liam had never once asked her to trust him blindly the way they always had. He had only ever handed her hard evidence and asked her, respectfully, to verify it herself before believing a word. With mere seconds to spare before the deletion process completed permanently, Liam successfully restored the original unaltered server logs, and the full, undeniable truth appeared simultaneously on every screen in the room at once. The recovered data showed clearly that Jason had accessed Amelia's private account directly from his own personal workstation on multiple occasions, that Ryan had personally approved every single shell company involved in the scheme, and that Grace had carefully built an entire communications strategy specifically designed to place all the blame squarely on Amelia alone. Together, the three of them had secretly planned to divide her remaining company shares among themselves once she had been permanently removed from power. A recorded conversation from an earlier private meeting, pulled from the same restored system, captured Jason's own voice describing Amelia as the perfect face to take the fall for everything, precisely because her lifelong fear of loneliness kept her from ever questioning the people closest to her. Amelia did not cry in that moment, and she did not raise her voice above a calm, controlled tone. She simply asked each of them, one by one, looking each person directly in the eye, whether a single moment of their so-called friendship had ever once been real. Grace said absolutely nothing, staring down at the polished conference table instead. Ryan tried desperately to shift every ounce of blame onto Jason alone. Jason insisted coldly that Amelia shared equal responsibility because she had signed important documents without ever bothering to read them carefully first. Amelia admitted that particular truth openly in front of the entire board, without flinching away from her own failure. She said her carelessness had indeed been a genuine mistake on her part, but that her mistake never once gave any of them the right to commit an actual crime against her, or against every single employee who depended on the company for their livelihood. Investigators entered the conference room within minutes of being called, taking Jason, Ryan, and Grace into custody together for formal questioning on charges of fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice. The board immediately offered, almost desperately, to reinstate her as chief executive right there on the spot, but Amelia calmly declined for the moment, insisting instead on a fully independent audit and a transparent public vote only after every fact had been properly disclosed. As she walked slowly past the people who had once called themselves her closest friends in the entire world, Amelia did not look back at any of them, not even once. Liam stood quietly a few steps behind her, asking for nothing in return, expecting no public thanks and no financial reward for everything he had risked to help her. The investigation that followed over the coming weeks confirmed definitively that Mednova had existed as nothing more than an elaborate vehicle designed purely to drain money out of Sterling Hope Technologies. Jason faced a long list of serious criminal charges that would follow him for years. Ryan chose to cooperate fully with prosecutors in exchange for a somewhat reduced sentence. Grace lost her entire career in communications almost overnight, once her carefully constructed plans to destroy Amelia's reputation became public knowledge across the industry. Amelia herself was formally cleared of any intentional wrongdoing in the affair, though she still faced sharp public criticism for weak internal oversight during her years running the company unchecked. She did not hide from that criticism or make excuses for it. At the shareholder meeting that followed shortly after, standing alone at the podium, Amelia openly admitted that her own quiet pride and her deep, lifelong need to be liked had allowed her to hand real power to people who never once deserved it. The board voted, this time unanimously, to formally restore her as chief executive, on the firm condition that a permanent independent oversight system be established immediately going forward. Amelia personally dismissed every single executive connected to the fraud, worked tirelessly to protect the jobs of ordinary employees who had done nothing wrong, and formally canceled the Mednova acquisition once and for all, closing that painful chapter completely. She then personally offered Liam a newly created position as Director of Corporate Ethics and Oversight, a role built specifically around the values he had already shown he possessed. He respectfully turned down the excessively high salary she first proposed, asking instead only for the authority to report directly to the board itself and a firm guarantee that he could never be fired again for raising legitimate concerns in the future. Amelia agreed to every single condition without a moment's hesitation. What slowly grew between them afterward was built entirely on mutual respect, not on the false idea that Amelia had somehow rescued a poor man with her own considerable wealth. Liam taught her, patiently and without judgment, how to tell the real difference between someone who disagreed with her purely out of selfish interest and someone who disagreed with her because they genuinely wanted to protect her from herself. Slowly, month by month, Amelia learned how to build honest relationships that did not depend on power, expensive gifts, or empty flattering words designed to keep her comfortable and blind. His young daughter appeared in the unfolding story only through small, quiet details, the way he always left the office at the exact same time on certain evenings without exception, just to call her and keep every promise he had ever made to her. In time, Amelia came to understand something simple, something true down to its core. Liam had never once looked at her as a wealthy, powerful executive worth impressing or flattering. He had only ever seen her, from the very first night, as a human being who deserved to know the plain, uncomfortable truth. 1 full year later, Sterling Hope Technologies had completely rebuilt its public reputation and had become widely known throughout the industry for having the strongest whistleblower protections of any company its size in the entire country. Amelia no longer hosted the extravagant, glittering parties she once used to draw admiration from people who barely knew her. Her circle of friends had grown small, quiet, and genuinely honest, made up now of Eleanor, of Liam, and a small handful of loyal colleagues who had dared to speak the truth openly during the very worst days of the crisis. Liam's own life had grown steadier and more secure over that year, though he never once let his new position or his new title change the simple principles that had cost him so much before. Something quiet and patient had grown steadily between Amelia and Liam over those 12 months, gentle and unhurried, never once turning him into a man made dependent on her fortune or her name. One quiet evening, with the office nearly empty around them and the city lights just beginning to flicker on outside the windows, Amelia asked him why he still insisted on telling the truth, even though it had cost him so dearly every single time he chose to speak it. Liam answered simply, without any hesitation at all, that a comfortable book could make someone feel better for exactly one night, but the truth, however painful, could quietly save the entire rest of a person's life. Amelia admitted, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, that his warning all those months earlier had been the single most painful thing anyone had ever said to her face, and at the very same time it had also been the kindest, most genuine thing anyone had ever done for her in her entire life. As the last of the office lights dimmed slowly behind them, with no parties left to attend, no cameras waiting outside, and no empty praise left to fill the silence between them, Amelia and Liam walked out of the building together as two equal people side by side. She no longer feared the deep loneliness that had shaped so much of her life, because she had finally come to understand, in the hardest way possible, that one honest person standing beside her was worth more than an entire glittering room full of people who had only ever loved her power. False friends will protect your comfortable feelings only for as long as the lie still serves their own interests. A true friend may hurt you deeply with the truth, but they will say it anyway, every single time, even when it costs them absolutely everything they have left.